Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. The sound of violins poured into the grand hall like a sheet of light silk, so thin it seemed it might tear with the slightest touch. White roses lined the aisle, ribbons draped from the high ceiling and swayed gently in the air conditioning. A wedding fit for magazines, for numbers, and for polite congratulations. To anyone passing by, it would look like the happiest day of the bride's life. Clara Bennett stood in the dressing room, just one marble wall away from the stage. She stared at herself in the mirror, flawless, powdery skin, pink lips, a veil draped over her shoulders, a mermaid gown hugging every curve. Perfection so breathtaking, it felt unreal. But in her reflected eyes was a fear stretched thin, like a crack ready to split. She raised her hand to touch the collarbone beneath the lace and felt only cold. "You look beautiful, Clara." Her mother leaned closer, her light perfume half a lullaby, half a command. With practiced fingers, she straightened the veil. "Today, the Bennetts will survive their darkest hour. All you need to do is smile." Clara had been smiling for a month straight, smiles that looked right to everyone except her own heart. When she didn't smile, they asked, "Don't you want to save the family?" When she nodded, they whispered, "Thank goodness, she knows her duty." She understood. She was a calculation. Marry her, gain capital, trade her, pay off debt. There was no space for the word want. The door swung open. Her father entered, looking like a businessman who had just closed a major deal. His eyes swept over his daughter as if valuing the stock. "No need to be nervous," he said, adjusting his tie. "Just walk down the aisle, say the vows. The Whitmores invest, the company survives. Don't do anything to shame us." Clara pressed her lips together. Since childhood, she had been accustomed to us, a we that never once asked, "How are you?" She nodded. What else could she say? A soft knock. Damien Whitmore appeared like a walking luxury ad. Crisp white suit, sleek hair, expensive cologne. He stopped in front of her and smiled. Not the kind of smile that warmed, but a practiced curve of habit. "You look a—" He studied her, then lowered his voice. Acceptable." "Thank you," Clara heard herself answer, though it felt like someone else speaking. Something heavy sank inside her stomach. Damien leaned closer, voice low, "Just for them. After today, everything will follow the schedule. You'll learn fast. Don't think of running, because truly," his lips tilted in a half smirk, "you have nowhere to go." A sharp thorn pierced Clara's chest. She stood taller, forcing her chin not to tremble. Damien's eyes cut through the veil, cold enough to chill her bones. For a flicker of a second, she saw it clearly. If her life was a scale, he pressed his finger down on the side that favored him, without a blink of hesitation. The music outside shifted tempo. A signal. The wedding planner peeked in and whispered, "It's time." They led Clara out of the white room. The hallway gleamed under bright lights. When the grand doors opened, the noise of the hall seemed to drain from her ears, leaving only her pounding heart. Her mother's hand rested firmly yet tenderly on her arm. "Smile, darling," she instructed, "for all of us." Clara stepped onto the red carpet. Each step felt like walking into someone else's dream. Ahead stood the flower-covered altar, Damien upright in his suit, hundreds of eyes fixed on her. Familiar and strange faces, partners, shareholders, journalists, all smiling. Smiles counted in future profits. 5 steps from the altar, Clara accidentally met Damien's eyes. A block of ice. No warmth, no us, only possession. A thought lit up in her head, as clear as an exit sign. "I have to get out." She stopped. The room gasped like a small wave. Her mother's grip tightened painfully, whispering urgently, "Keep walking." Her father had already risen, his stare blazing across the aisle. Clara looked at the red carpet ahead, then to the side. An exit door unadorned, no flowers. The only path is not decorated. Her heart pounded. She released her mother's hand, and she ran. Heels clattered against the floor. The mermaid dress snagged her calves, heavy as a curse. The MC stammered, and the orchestra fell silent. A few guests jumped up, thinking it was staged entertainment. "Stop her!" Damien roared, his polished facade shattered. Clara darted through the corridor. A hotel staff member nearly dropped a tray of glasses as she flew past. The veil caught on a doorknob. She yanked hard, ripping fabric with a piercing tear. She didn't look back. Every second meant the hounds behind gained another step. The side door burst open. Night crashed over her like a bucket of ice water. No, real water. Rain hammered her shoulders, her hair, her carefully powdered face. The veil clung to her back, the lace gown drinking rain until it armored her body. Clara inhaled sharply, the metallic taste of panic on her tongue. She sprinted along the sidewalk, shoes slipping on wet pavement. Behind her, heavy footsteps gave chase. Guards loyal by the hour, by the paycheck. "Miss Bennett!" one shouted. "Stop!" She veered into the parking lot. Yellow lamps cast just enough light to see slanting streaks of rain, the smell of gasoline, wet asphalt. She wove between car hoods, clutching mirrors as if they were fragments of reality. God, if there's anywhere at all. The footsteps closed in. She held her breath, pressed herself against the side of an SUV, heart thundering. For a second, she imagined what would happen if they caught her. A closed-door lecture, a scolding, the wedding rescheduled, vows read like contracts, a life locked inside a business agreement. Number. She bolted from the SUV, dashing toward the lot's exit. The road opened like a black river. Streetlights dotted dimly. Rain stung her eyes. She stumbled into the street just as an old truck turned the corner. A blaring horn, tires shrieking on wet asphalt, water spraying up in a silver arc. The truck halted inches from her. Clara froze, hand clutching her chest. From the cab, the window rolled down. A face appeared under the glow of the streetlight, angular, composed, eyes so deep they gave the rain its rhythm. "Are you insane?" The man's voice was rough, hoarse, not from anger, but from someone used to speaking little. Clara needed half a second to remember to breathe. Behind her, footsteps approached again. She turned and saw two guards emerging from the lot. Time was running out. She leaned toward the truck, knocking on the wet window, her hand trembling. "Please, help me, I'm begging you." The man studied her. His eyes weren't like those she knew from parties. No weighing, no forcing, no saving. Just calculating whether to let a stranger into his small world. 1 second. 2. Clara heard her heart beat louder than the rain. A taxi sped by, splashing water over her gown. She must have looked ridiculous. A bride in a soaked mermaid dress knocking on an old truck in a storm, like knocking on the door of fate itself. If it weren't her life, she might have laughed. The door unlocked from the inside. "Get in!" Clara didn't ask twice. She gathered her dress, slipped into the passenger seat, rain pouring onto the floor mats like spilled guilt. The man frowned, grabbed a flannel shirt from the back seat, and tossed it at her. "Cover up, you'll catch a cold." "I thank you, she stammered. "Seatbelt." He shifted gears. The truck rolled forward. They vanished from the hotel like a shadow. In the rearview mirror, the guards rushed into the street, looking left and right, then disappeared into the curtain of rain. Clara clutched the shirt, its coarse warmth against her chilled skin. She sat upright, polite, then realized posture didn't stop her trembling. The truck wasn't fast but steady, its engine humming like a low song. Inside, it smelled faintly of wood, odd yet mixed with oil, clean and real. They drove in silence. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving her ashamed. She had soaked his seat and left muddy stains on his floor. "I'll clean it," she blurted. "Good," he replied, eyes on the road. "Just don't sneeze on the dashboard." Clara stole a glance. Up close, his features were sharper. Straight nose, square jaw, raindrops still glistening on his cheek from when he opened the door. His eyes focused steadily on the road, patient, like someone used to long drives, like someone who knew exactly where he was going. "What's your name?" She realized too late that it sounded forward. He tilted his head just enough to reset the boundary. "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Clara hugged the shirt tighter, voice still trembling, but now tinged with stubbornness. She had begged for a ride, but she still wanted to know who saved her. Typical Clara. His mouth twitched. Exasperated? Amused? He didn't say. You just ran from a wedding, didn't you? Clara looked down at her gown. Yes. Then inexplicably she laughed, a short, broken sound spilling out with tears. I must look like an anti-arranged marriage poster. At least it's convincing. No one would doubt it. The reply was so dry Clara blinked, then laughed again. She felt a tight knot in her chest, hard for so long, suddenly loosen. The truck left the city center and entered darker roads lined with trees. Rain eased, tapping softly on the roof. Clara, who had carried the day on sheer will, leaned back, eyelids heavy. But she feared if she slept, she'd wake in another white room. She turned to him. You can drop me anywhere. I'll manage. Where? He asked. Midnight, rain, wedding dress, no wallet, no phone. Do you have a backup plan? Clara's tongue stuck. Her backup plan had been to run as fast as she could. Now she had, and it was empty. She bit her lip, whispered, I just can't marry him. This time the man didn't answer right away. Streetlights cast shifting shadows across his face, thoughts weighing silently. The truck turned onto a dirt road, jolted lightly, then stopped in front of a small wooden cabin hidden behind pines. He cut the engine. Suddenly the world was quiet again. Only the rain on the tin roof and Clara's hesitant heartbeat. He turned, looked at her directly for the first time. Up close, she saw the faint ring of brown around his dark pupils. Not cold like earlier, but not warm either. Get out, he said. You can stay here for the night. Clara pressed her lips together, nodding quickly, gathering her gown to step out. He raised a hand to stop her. But remember this. She looked up. His voice was low, firm, each word hammered into the night. I'm only giving you one night. The wooden cabin nestled deep among the pine trees, glowing with warm yellow light like a tiny oasis in the night rain. Alexander pushed the door open and stepped in first. Clara trailed after him, her soaked heels squelching loudly against the wooden floor. Inside was so tidy it felt almost foreign. Shelves lined with books, a dark wooden table, an old sofa draped with a wool blanket, and a small kitchen with only a few essentials. Nothing luxurious, nothing polished, but Clara felt an unfamiliar wave of peace wash over her, something she had never known, not even in her family's sprawling mansion. Take off those wet clothes or you'll be running a fever tomorrow. Alexander frowned lightly, rummaged through a wooden cabinet, and tossed her a clean towel and a loose set of clothes, an old flannel shirt and gray sweatpants. Where are these? I don't keep women's clothes here. Clara hugged the clothes to her chest, her eyes lighting up. Thank you. Really, thank you. She wanted to say more, but Alexander had already turned away, pointing at the small door leading to the bathroom. In there! Hurry up and change. 15 minutes later, Clara emerged, her hair still damp but dried as best as she could with the towel. The oversized clothes swallowed her frame, making her look small and lost. But at least she was no longer drenched and heavy. She hesitated. I'm Clara. Clara Bennett. Though I guess you already know I'm the runaway bride tonight. Alexander gave her a quick glance, his expression unreadable. My name doesn't matter. Just think of me as a kind stranger passing by. Clara forced a small smile. His words sounded curt, yet the way he had given her a towel, clothes, and a roof from the rain told a different story. Alexander pulled the wool blanket off the sofa and spread it out on the floor. You sleep here. One night only. Tomorrow morning, you leave. Clara bit her lip. It was the second time he had said it, as if to draw the boundary again. But right now, the old sofa felt like heaven. She curled up under the blanket, listening to the patter of rain on the tin roof. The scent of pine wood mixed with a faint trace of coffee made her feel more at ease than 1,000 bouquets from the wedding hours ago. In the dark, Clara thought of her parents, likely furious beyond measure, and of Damien, who was surely sending people to search every corner of the city. The thought made her shiver, and she pulled the blanket tighter. But soon the rain and the wind lulled her into a restless sleep. In the next room, Alexander remained awake, leaning against the doorframe and staring out into the downpour. This stranger, awkward, exhausted, reminded him too much of himself years ago. Desperate, longing to escape the world. Clara woke when the first rays of dawn slipped through the curtains. Her back ached from the narrow sofa, but the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen brought a faint smile to her lips. A strange morning, no butler calling her up, no phone demanding her attention, just sunlight and the scent of coffee. Alexander sat at the table holding a book, a steaming mug beside him. He didn't look at her, only gave a small nod. "There's bread on the counter. Eat, then go." Clara froze. "Go? Where?" "Out of here." He set the book down, his voice calm but firm. "I told you. Just one night." Clara's chest tightened. She had no money, no papers, and her phone was in her family's hands. If she stepped outside now, she would fall straight into Damien's grasp. "But I have nowhere to go." Her voice trembled, though her eyes tried to stay steady. Alexander arched a brow, replying curtly, "Not my problem." For a moment, Clara felt cornered. But then an idea sparked. She couldn't leave. At least not yet. She drew in a breath, stepped forward, and forced a stubborn smile. "Then, let me stay just one more day. I'll cook, clean, and do the laundry. You won't be feeding me for free." Alexander finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over her. The baggy flannel shirt, messy hair, and eyes shining with reckless determination. He gave a faint chuckle, unclear whether at her or himself. "You think I need a clumsy housekeeper?" Clara flushed. "At least I know how to make coffee and mop the floor." Alexander was silent for a few seconds, then shook his head. "Suit yourself, but don't get in my way." Clara pressed her lips together, but triumph welled up inside her. Even if it was just lingering another day, she knew. This was her chance to cling to the fragile thread of freedom. That morning, the wooden cabin, usually filled only with the sound of wind through the pines and Alexander's turning pages, was now alive with unfamiliar noises. The clatter of a knife on a cutting board, the rich smell of butter sizzling, and a soft whistle from a woman's lips. Alexander frowned, set his book aside, and stepped out of his room. What greeted him was a sight he could hardly believe. Clara drowning in his oversized flannel shirt and gray sweatpants, her messy hair tied into a loose ponytail, clumsily flipping eggs in a pan. "You're awake?" Clara looked up, her smile radiant, as if she had no idea she was trespassing in a stranger's domain. "I thought I should prove I'm useful if I want to stay longer." Alexander leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his tone dry. "You plan to win me over with breakfast?" "Exactly. If necessary, I'll do lunch and dinner too." Clara winked, awkwardly dropping 2 slices of bacon into the pan as hot oil splattered across the stove. He shook his head but eventually sat at the table. Golden eggs, crisp bacon, and strong coffee. When he tasted it, Alexander had to admit, the food was better than expected. "Not bad," he said curtly. "Just not bad. You should have said amazing." Clara planted her hands on her hips, clearly waiting for more. Alexander stayed silent and kept eating. Clara pouted but grinned inwardly, watching him finish the whole plate. After breakfast, Clara declared enthusiastically, "I'll clean the house. You'll see I'm not useless." Before Alexander could stop her, she dove into the task, and disaster followed. While dusting the bookshelf, she knocked 2 heavy volumes loose, nearly hitting her head. In her panic to catch them, she toppled the whole stack, sending books crashing onto the floor and dragging a set of teacups down with them. Glass shattered. Clara blushed crimson as she scrambled to pick up the shards, only breaking them further. Alexander walked in, sighing. "Stand up." He grabbed the broom and dustpan himself. "Sorry, I'm not used to this," Clara mumbled. "Clearly." His voice was flat. She pressed her lips together, unwilling to give up. In the afternoon, Clara followed him into the shed, only to step on a rusty nail jutting out of an old plank. "Ah!" she yelped, collapsing onto the floor. Alexander rushed over, his brow furrowed at the sight of blood seeping from her pale foot. "Don't you watch where you're going?" Clara winced but forced a smile. "I did. The nail just chose me." He carefully disinfected the wound, wrapping it in gauze. "If you haven't had a tetanus shot, you need a hospital." I got one 2 years ago. I'll be fine. She paused, then chuckled weakly. Funny thing is, that was also from a nail. Maybe they like me? Alexander stiffened, his frown deepening. What do you mean, like? That's just stupidity. Clara scrunched her nose, stifling a laugh. Well, at least they're loyal. They always find me. But don't worry, I've got insurance, so I'll survive. He stared at her, then shook his head in defeat. You're trouble disguised as a person. Clara leaned against the wall, answering calmly. Yep. She used her injured foot as an excuse not to leave. Strangely, even though she broke or spilled everything she touched, she felt freer than ever. She could cook whatever she wanted, clean, even if the results were catastrophic. But these were her choices, and every time Alexander scowled or snapped, she only found it amusing. At least he didn't treat her like merchandise. At least he wasn't forcing her to shoulder her family's debts. In Clara's heart, the cabin felt like a tiny heaven. Here she was allowed to make mistakes, to laugh, to live as she pleased, something she had never once experienced in her grand mansion. The next day, hobbling on her bandaged foot, Clara stretched to reach a book high on the shelf. She balanced precariously on an old wooden chair, wobbling dangerously. Careful, Alexander said, glancing up briefly from his book. I'm fine. The chair slipped. Clara flailed, about to fall, until Alexander dropped his book, darted forward, and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her down. They nearly toppled together, but Alexander steadied them just in time. Clara landed squarely in his arms, her heart pounding wildly. His breath brushed her hair, carrying the familiar scent of pine wood and coffee. She looked up, his eyes deep and steady, locked onto hers, holding her in place for a breathless moment. Silence enveloped them. Only the sound of their hearts echoed loudly in the small cabin. You! Alexander's grip tightened slightly, his voice low and rough. You really are a disaster. Clara's cheeks burned as she let out an awkward laugh, though inside she was trembling. In that instant, she knew she had skipped a heartbeat, and not just from the fall. Alexander quickly released her and turned away. Yet his hand still carried the warmth of her, a feeling not so easy to dismiss. The morning began with the rich aroma of coffee. Clara sat lazily at the wooden table, chin resting on her hand, watching the sunlight filter through the window. The little cabin felt cut off from the world, and for that fleeting moment, she felt more at peace than ever. But peace never lasted long. When Clara opened the old newspaper Alexander had tossed onto the chair, her eyes froze on the front page headline, Bennett Bride Escapes During the Wedding of the Century. Beneath it was a photo of her in her wedding gown, caught mid-run through the hotel corridor, panic written across her face. Clara's heart constricted, her hand trembling. She read on. Sources close to the family report that Clara Bennett may have been aided by a mysterious accomplice. The groom's side declares they will use every means necessary to bring her back and clarify the cause of the incident. Clara dropped the paper, her face pale. Throughout the day, she noticed unfamiliar noises around the cabin, the sound of a car idling on the dirt road, and the faint murmur of voices asking questions at the nearby store. When Alexander returned from shopping, he placed a basket of vegetables on the table without fuss, but his narrowed eyes betrayed sharp vigilance. Someone's been asking around, he said flatly. Clara's breath caught. It's Damien's men? Alexander didn't answer directly, just looked at her. His gaze told her enough. That night, Clara tossed restlessly on the sofa. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damien grabbing her wrist, his cold voice echoing. How long do you think you can run? Shuddering, she rose and walked to the window. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, the thick darkness pressing like a giant hand, waiting to swallow her whole. One slip, and she would be dragged back into her cage. Clara bit her lip, turning to glance at Alexander. He sat calmly at the table, reading as if nothing was happening. His composure felt almost maddening. How could he be so still when the whole world was hunting her? Aren't you worried at all? Clara whispered. Alexander set his book down and raised his eyes, deep and steady. What good does worrying do? If they come, we'll know. His matter-of-fact tone both steadied her and sparked irritation. The next morning, as Clara busied herself preparing breakfast, Alexander spoke suddenly, without looking at her. By staying here, you only make things more dangerous. Clara froze, the ladle slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor. He turned, his gaze cold as ice. Damien's men won't give up. If they find you here, you won't be the only one in trouble. I will be too. Clara's lips tightened, her chest aching. She knew he was right, but his blunt tone still cut deep. So, you want me to leave? Her voice trembled. Alexander was silent for a long beat before turning away. I want you to understand, this place isn't heaven. It's only a stopover, and every stopover has shadows lurking outside. That afternoon, as Clara hung blankets to dry in the yard, she caught sight of a distant figure half hidden among the trees. Her pulse spiked. She yanked the curtains shut and rushed inside. Alexander emerged from his room, catching her frightened expression. He didn't ask questions. He simply locked the door, then stood at the window, his eyes gleaming with rare tension. In that instant, Clara realized he wasn't indifferent at all. He had been vigilant from the start, just unwilling to let her see it. She sank into the sofa, hugging a blanket to her chest. Outside, darkness thickened. Inside, Alexander stood like a silent wall. And in that moment, Clara felt both terrified and faintly safe, because no matter what happened, she was no longer alone. Morning in the small town unfolded with the chirping of sparrows and the faint scent of pine resin drifting in the mist. On the porch roof, raindrops from the night before still clung together like strands of glass beads. Alexander propped a ladder against the shingles, an old baseball cap pulled low, a box of nails and a hammer in hand. The wind lifted the shingles, he said simply. They need pinning down before it rains again. Clara shaded her eyes, looking up. What can I do to help? Hold the ladder. And don't climb, he replied, voice calm but firm like a safety regulation. Got it. I'll just hold the ladder. She smiled, silently praying not to turn ladder holding into a national disaster. Cool winds swept down from the forest. Alexander climbed smoothly, movements efficient and steady. He lifted the shingle, spread roofing tar, drove the nails in a clean rhythm, hammer strikes precise like a metronome. Clara found herself watching closely, part curiosity, part, though she hated to admit it, admiration. He worked as though he had done this all his life. No sloppiness, no showiness, no wasted words. Done, he said, climbing down. Need more tar on the edge. We'll stop at the hardware store. The home, Clara caught herself, remembering they were in a small town. The hardware store in town? Alexander nodded. Mitchell's Hardware. Corner of Main and Cedar. Mitchell's Hardware was the kind of store you only saw in America. Wooden facade, a bell chiming at the door, price tags scribbled in marker hanging from bins of nails, the familiar smell of pine mixed with machine oil. An older man with a silver beard and a leather tool belt glanced up and grinned. Morning, Alex. What'll it be today? Roof tar, a box of shingle nails, and motion sensor lights. Alexander answered without hesitation. Mitchell's eyes flicked curiously to Clara, then softened into a kind smile. New friend? Clara pressed her lips together, heart racing. Alexander's reply was even, She's helping me with the house. Good on her, Mitchell chuckled, pulling a basket. Those motion lights will save you trouble. Folks have spotted strange cars passing by at night lately. Clara shivered slightly. Alexander only gave a short, as if he had already planned for this. He picked the right tar, checked production dates, hefted the nails for weight, then added outdoor tape and rags. Every choice was practical, like a list he'd memorized. Anything missing? Clara asked, trying to sound casual. Alexander glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. Gloves! For the ladder holder. She burst out laughing, a little relief slipping through. They left the store and wandered through the weekend farmers market in the square. Rows of white tents, baskets of fresh vegetables, loaves of sourdough steaming warm, jars of honey sparkling in the sun. A local band played bluegrass, mandolin notes skipping as children danced around the fountain. Clara lingered at the apple stand, inhaling the crisp, sweet scent. I could make pie, she said, eyes alight. This time I won't wreck the kitchen, I promise. Alexander eyed the apples, then her. 2 pounds, don't overdo it. 3, Clara bargained, carefully choosing each fruit. She added thyme, yellow potatoes, a warm loaf of bread, and then paused at a stall selling wildflowers. A small bouquet tied with twine made her stop. Simple, yet beautiful. Take it, Alexander said shortly. Put it on the table. You're encouraging me to splurge, Clara teased, though her eyes softened. For the first time since fleeing the wedding, she felt herself blending into ordinary life, picking apples, bargaining over flowers, listening to music in the open air. No one stared at her like a scandal headline. No one whispered Bennett with calculation. The simplicity was so pure it made her throat tighten. On the way back, Alexander drove slowly down the tree-lined street. The barber's pole spun red and white. A diner's sign read, "Pecan pie today," and the American flag rippled before the brick town hall. The town felt like a film still, unhurried, where people waved across the street, where life followed the seasons. Clara cradled the bouquet, gazing at the view sliding past the window. If only I could live here forever. Alexander said nothing, flicked the blinker, and turned down the dirt road home. That afternoon, they spread tar across the roof edge, installed motion lights by the porch and backyard. Alexander measured with precision, drilled clean, and tightened bolts. Clara stood nearby, handing tools, her small task, but one she took seriously. Drill, he said. Here, she replied, passing it like a nurse handing forceps in an operating room. Alexander glanced at her. No smile, but his eyes were softer. When the work was done, they sat on the steps sipping lemonade. The sun sank behind the pines, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Clara rolled up her sleeves, tilting her face to the breeze, feeling lighter than she had in years. Today she had lived an impossibly normal day, holding ladders, buying apples, installing lights. Ordinary, yet to her, it was a luxury. Tonight I'll make roast chicken with thyme and potatoes, she said excitedly, and apple pie for dessert. Sounds decent, Alexander said, as if the admission cost him effort. By night, the cabin filled with warm scents, roasted chicken, melting butter, thyme in the air, and the scent of fresh pie crust from the oven. Clara set the plate before Alexander, eyes wide with anticipation. He tasted, nodded once. Not bad, she pressed. Pretty good. Clara's grin stretched, victory glowing. They ate in companionable silence, a small radio playing softly in the background, playing country music. Outside, insects hummed like a summer chorus. Near midnight, as Clara washed dishes, the porch motion light flicked on. Bright light sliced across the yard. She froze, hands still in the soapy water. Alex? Her voice dropped. He shut off the radio and listened. The whole cabin held its breath. Another light snapped on in the backyard. Then came the faint crunch of gravel, a sound only someone familiar with the woods would notice. Alexander signaled her back. He grabbed a long flashlight from the drawer in his phone. Call 911 if I say so, he murmured, crisp and steady. He opened the door, stepping onto the porch with deliberate poise. Flashlight low, beam sweeping across the grass, measured, commanding. I see you, Alexander called, voice carrying firmly. This yard has cameras. You're being recorded. This is private property. You're trespassing. Leave now. A figure froze at the tree line, caught in the light. I'm just lost, the man said, voice strained. Lost? At midnight? Walking along someone's fence? Alexander angled the beam to ankle height, blinding from below without direct glare. Turn left, take the dirt road back to Maine. Otherwise, I call the county sheriff. Inside, Clara stood behind the curtain, phone clenched tight. She heard how Alexander laid each word, not threatening violence, not shouting, but crystal clear in law and authority. Private property, cameras, the sheriff. Calm but skilled, far beyond the way ordinary neighbors would handle it. The man hesitated, then turned away. Alexander kept the beam steady, tracking shoes and steps. Don't try again, he said in the same tone. Only when the crunch of gravel faded did Alexander relax his shoulders, shut the door, and bolt the lock. He didn't soothe with, it's okay. Instead, he checked every latch, reviewed the camera app, and logged the time. Then he looked at Clara. Clear, he concluded like a professional report. Clara nodded, realizing her knees were trembling. She sank into a chair, exhaling hard. You just handled that like a movie scene. In movies, they don't call the sheriff, Alexander replied dryly. Here, there are laws. Clara studied him. It wasn't just that he knew how to install lights or pick the right time. It was the way he stood on the porch, speaking with so few words, yet with complete control. He had learned this somewhere. Whether in boardrooms or darker places, she didn't know. But she knew her fear had been cut in half simply because he was there. Thank you, she said softly. I was really scared. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Warm kitchen light softened his sharp features. Fear is normal, he said. What matters is knowing what to do. Clara bit her lip, then let out a small laugh, trying to lighten the air. What also matters is having motion lights and cameras. Mitchell was right. Mitchell's always right about lights, Alexander added with the faintest smirk, a rare sliver of humor that warmed her chest. She propped her elbows on the table, eyes steady on him. Alex, he raised a brow. You're not like other people, she said plainly, and I'm grateful for that. Something flickered in his eyes. Not pride, not denial, but like hearing an old name spoken. He stood, put the flashlight back in the drawer, his voice neutral again. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we finish the porch roof. Clara nodded, but as she reached the doorway to the sofa, she turned back. I feel safe here. This time Alexander didn't answer. He only gave the faintest nod, so subtle it could be missed if she hadn't been watching. Clara lay down, pulling the blanket to her chin. Outside, the motion lights clicked off, returning the yard to soft darkness. Inside, the wall clock ticked steadily, like the heartbeat of the house. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since that stormy night she ran, sleep came light as a promise. Somewhere between the edges of peace and danger stood a bolted porch door, a light ready to flare at the slightest step, and a man who would stand tall and say, "This is private property." And that alone was enough for Clara. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. Evening fell, painting the pines behind the cabin in a brilliant wash of orange gold. Clara sat on the porch steps, cradling a cup of hot chamomile tea, her gaze drifting dreamily as the clouds shifted colors. Beside her, Alexander placed a wooden tray with his usual black coffee. Since the night the stranger appeared outside, she had noticed how often he checked the windows and the motion lights, and how he sometimes stood silently on the porch, watching the darkness. Clara knew danger still lurked beyond the trees, but in this quiet pause she felt the urge to break the silence, to make him say more than his clipped, sparse words. How long have you lived here? Clara asked softly, as though afraid to shatter the calm. Long enough to get used to it. Alexander sipped his coffee, eyes fixed on the treetops. But you don't look like someone born to live in a place this quiet. Clara smiled. You look like a man who once stood in front of a crowd, knowing he was in control. Alexander tilted his head slightly, a strange glimmer flickering in his eyes before he lowered his voice. Crowds were never the problem. The real challenge is managing expectations. When you stand before shareholders, the important thing isn't reporting losses. It's painting a line of growth, making them believe the future is worth more than the present. Clara froze. Those words weren't the language of a handyman patching roofs. They weren't the words of a recluse hiding in the woods. That was the voice of a man who had once commanded millions, who could persuade a room full of suits with nothing more than a steady gaze and a few charts. Her heartbeat quickened. Who were you before this? Alexander turned to her. For a fleeting moment, his eyes darkened, deep as an abyss. Just someone who trusted the wrong people. The blunt reply slammed the door shut. Clara refused to back down. She leaned in, meeting his eyes. That's not it. You know the market, how shareholders think, and how to run a company. You dash. Enough! Alexander's voice cut sharply, low but edged with steel. The air froze. Clara bit her lip, her chest sinking. He rarely spoke so harshly, and that alone told her she had brushed against a wound not yet healed. She turned away, hiding her unease. But her mind flashed back to the pile of old newspapers she had once glimpsed. A front page with a man in a suit standing before the logo of a giant corporation. The face, hard, sharp, looked not so different from Alexander's now. Clara inhaled deeply, trying to change the subject, but the question echoed inside her. Who is he, really? Through dinner, Alexander barely spoke. Clara had made chicken soup and toasted bread. He ate without praise or complaint. Occasionally his gaze flickered toward her, only to dart away again. Clara felt as though she had knocked on a locked door. Behind it, what waited? A secret? A scar? Or a man completely different from the simple Alex he pretended to be? She remembered Damien's cold stare at the wedding. Alexander's coldness was different, not cruelty but defense, as if he were afraid someone might see the cracks beneath. Late at night, Clara lay restless on the sofa. Rain pattered softly, and the wind stirred the pines. Then she heard movement from Alexander's room. His footsteps padded out to the porch, where he stood for a long time. Clara pulled the blanket around her shoulders, rose quietly, and peeked through the crack of the door. He stood tall beneath the porch light, holding a small photograph in his hand. His eyes fixed on it, shadowed with sorrow and complexity so deep that Clara's breath caught. She couldn't see what the photo showed, but she knew it was something pulling him back into the past. That gaze wasn't the gaze of a handyman. It wasn't the gaze of a hermit in hiding. It was the gaze of a man who had once lost everything. Clara withdrew silently, her chest tightening. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast, Alexander walked in. He looked normal, tidier even, like the night before had never happened. "Toast?" he asked, voice steady as ever. Clara nodded, smiling faintly, but said no more. She understood now. Some doors could only be opened when their keeper was ready, and inside she felt an odd ache of tenderness for him. This man, cold and guarded, yet carrying an unnamed pain behind his eyes. And at that moment, Clara realized she wanted to stay. She wanted to uncover the part of him he kept hidden, the part still fragile, still human beneath the armor. Noon sunlight filtered through the window, laying a pale golden glow across the living room. Clara busied herself with tidying, thinking quietly, "At least I should manage to do something useful." She gathered a few boxes piled in the corner, dusted the shelves, and rearranged the old books. When she bent down to lift a sagging cardboard box, the lid popped open and several old newspapers spilled onto the floor. Clara stooped to pick them up and froze. On the front page of the Wall Street Journal was a photo of a man in a dark suit, sharp eyes, proud features. The bold headline read, "Alexander Cole, the promising young CEO of Whitmore Group." Clara's heart lurched. She stared at the yellowed print. There was no mistaking it. It was Alexander, the man now living quietly in this wooden cabin, the man who wore flannel shirts and drove an old truck. She sank to the floor, eyes locked on the page. CEO of Whitmore? That was the very conglomerate Damien bragged about. Alexander had once stood at the top of it. Questions tumbled in her mind. Why had he disappeared? How could a man who once ruled the corporate world now be hiding in the woods? "What are you doing?" The low, cold voice cut from the doorway. Clara jolted, nearly dropping the paper. Alexander stood there, his figure blotting out the light, his gaze dark and intense. I didn't mean to," Clara stammered. "I was just cleaning and I found this." He strode forward and snatched the paper from her hands. The motion was sharp, final, like erasing evidence of the past. "Don't touch what doesn't concern you." His voice was harsh, hoarse with strain. Clara bit her lip. She wanted to ask more, to know more, but her reason reminded her she was only a guest by chance. Still, worry flickered in her eyes. "Alexander, why do you have to hide it?" He didn't answer right away. His grip tightened on the newspaper, shoulders taut. A heavy silence weighed down the room. Clara whispered gently, "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. I just don't want you to carry it all alone. I don't think you're a failure, no matter what happened." Alexander froze. Her words pierced straight to the place he had buried for years. "You don't understand." He let out a bitter laugh, sharp with irony. "You couldn't possibly understand." Clara stayed still, silent. Her eyes simply held his, steady, without judgment, without pressure. Alexander began to pace, fighting his memories. Then he stopped, shoulders trembling faintly. Yes, I was the CEO of Whitmore Group. His voice came rough, cracking. Once I had everything: power, fame, admiration. The press called me the rising star of the business world. I believed I could change everything. He gave a hollow, pained smile. Until the day I was betrayed by the very people I trusted most. A forged contract, numbers twisted beyond recognition, and everything collapsed. I lost the company, my reputation, even my reason to exist. The press turned me into a joke, and shareholders made me their scapegoat. No one remembered what I had fought for. His eyes glistened, though he turned his face into the shadows. So I disappeared. I abandoned the name Alexander Cole. I lived like a ghost, not because I loved the quiet, because I no longer had the strength to stand in the light. The room fell silent. Clara's chest tightened. The man before her wasn't the gruff recluse she had met in the storm, nor the proud CEO on the newspaper page. He was a man scarred, hiding his fractures behind a cold shell. Clara stepped closer, her voice soft as wind. You don't have to be strong in front of me. Alexander trembled slightly. His hands clutching the newspaper finally loosened. He didn't answer, just turned toward the porch, letting the shadows of dusk swallow his face. Clara stood watching him, an ache swelling in her chest. For the first time, she had seen the real Alexander. Not a title, not a disguise, but a man wounded, carrying pain too heavy for one heart. Night descended, and the pine forest surrounding the cabin sank into darkness. Only the chorus of insects and the flicker of the motion lights on the porch stirred the silence. Clara sat curled on the sofa, trying to read one of Alexander's old novels, but her heart wasn't at ease. Since finding that newspaper, the air between them had grown heavier. Something hovered in the room, too fragile for either of them to touch. The sudden roar of an engine tore through the night. Clara flinched, the book slipping from her hands. Headlights sliced across the window, blindingly bright. Then came the pounding at the door, loud, urgent, insistent. Alexander was already on his feet. He strode toward the entrance without hesitation. Clara followed close behind, her pulse racing. On the porch stood two men in black suits, broad-shouldered, stone-faced. One smirked, flashing a row of sharp white teeth. Sorry to intrude. We're looking for someone. Clara Bennett. Her parents are worried sick, and her fiancé is terribly anxious. Clara recoiled, pressing her back to the wall. The moment one man's eyes caught sight of her, they glimmered with triumph. But before he could step forward, Alexander filled the doorway, blocking him completely. She's not here. His tone was calm, cold as steel. The man arched a brow. We just saw her shadow inside. Alexander didn't blink. You're standing on private property. I've already called the county sheriff. Unless you'd like to spend the night in handcuffs, leave now. Both men hesitated. The certainty in his voice, the cool, razor-sharp gaze made them falter. One shifted forward, but Alexander leaned subtly, lowering his voice. Try me. Just 2 words, but the air froze. His figure filled the doorway like an unyielding wall of iron. The man drew in a breath, lips curling into a mock civil smile. We don't want trouble, but the girl will have to come back sooner or later. Don't get yourself tangled in things that don't concern you. Out, Alexander spoke a single word. Silence hung heavy. Then the two exchanged glances, turned, and descended the steps. Headlights flared again, the engine revved, and the car disappeared into the night. The door closed, the lock clicking firmly into place. Clara stood frozen, her knees trembling, not from fear, but from the moment she had just witnessed. Alexander turned back. His face was still stern, but when his eyes found her clinging to the wall, something softened. It's over. Clara swallowed hard, taking a shaky step forward, her voice trembling, but clear. Thank you for protecting me. He held her gaze but said nothing, only gave a small, steady nod. Yet in that silence, Clara felt more than words could ever carry. Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled faintly. No one had ever stood in front of her like that. Her parents had bartered her like a pawn. Damien had claimed her like a trophy. But Alexander, the cold, enigmatic man, had stood firm in the doorway, and with only a few words, sent danger retreating into the dark. Clara's heart thudded hard, strong, and undeniable. She realized then that the peace she longed for wasn't just in this cabin, it was in the man standing before her. That night, the cabin felt like an island adrift in a vast ocean of forest. After the encounter with Damien's men, Clara still trembled inside. But when Alexander lit the fireplace, the warmth of the flames wrapped the room, slowly pushing her fear aside and replacing it with an unfamiliar sense of peace. Clara sat curled in a thick wool blanket, her eyes fixed on the fire, its orange glow deepening the blush in her cheeks. Across from her, Alexander leaned against the wooden chair, calm in posture but with a quiet tension still lingering in his eyes. "You saved me," Clara whispered, breaking the silence. "If it hadn't been for you, I'd already be dragged back, locked in that golden cage." Alexander took a sip of his black coffee, his voice low and steady. "They'll be back. You need to be ready." Clara bit her lip, meeting his gaze. "Aren't you afraid?" For a moment, silence. Then Alexander set the mug down, shadows carving his face with memories. "Afraid? I used to know fear, but not anymore. Not after the day I almost died." Clara's eyes widened, waiting. The flames flickered in his eyes as he spoke. "My best friend, the one I trusted like a brother, sold me out. He forged contracts, joined hands with competitors, and pushed me into a trap." His hand clenched into a fist, joints cracking. "And it didn't stop there. They staged a car accident. I was driving on the highway when the brakes failed. When I woke, I was in the hospital, body broken, reputation shattered. The world believed I was greedy and corrupt. Friends abandoned me, colleagues turned away, shareholders treated me like garbage." He paused, the fire snapping like punctuation. "That night, I thought I would die, but I lived to see every back turned. So I chose to disappear, because staying meant being torn apart piece by piece." Clara sat frozen. She had never heard him speak so much, every word heavy with bitterness and pain. "You must have been so alone," she whispered. Alexander didn't deny it. His eyes stayed on the fire, dark and distant. A silence stretched between them. Then Clara drew in a breath, clutching the edge of the blanket. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed." His gaze snapped to her, sharp and piercing. "Since I was a child, I knew I wasn't allowed to be myself," Clara said, voice quiet but steady. "My parents never cared what I wanted. They only cared about debts, about marriages that could save them. Damien, he was their salvation ticket, and I was just the bargaining chip." Tears welled up. She wiped them quickly, but her voice still broke. "I used to dream of a family, of real love. But to them, I was never a person, only a tool, a pawn." Alexander's eyes lingered on her, fathomless. She turned away, but then forced herself to face him again. "Maybe I ran away not just because of Damien, but because for the first time, I wanted to choose my own life." In the little cabin, only the fire's crackle and their breathing filled the air. Two souls, each scarred differently, suddenly recognized themselves in one another. Clara let out a shaky laugh through her tears. "See? We're more alike than I thought. You were betrayed. I was imprisoned. Both of us are runners." Alexander's gaze held hers. In the firelight, Clara looked fragile yet fierce, her tear-bright eyes glowing with defiance. Almost unconsciously, his hand reached across, brushing hers. The touch was tentative, hesitant, afraid she would pull away. But Clara didn't. Instead, she held still, then gently closed her fingers around his. In that moment, time seemed to still. Their eyes locked, a silent tangle of words unspoken. "Thank you," Clara murmured, "for sharing. And for being here." Alexander bowed his head slightly, lips pressed tight as if to restrain emotion. Sweet words didn't come easily to him, but he didn't release her hand. The warmth of his touch spread across to her, chasing away the winter chill. The fire roared higher, casting amber light over their faces. Their breaths mingled in the space between them, so close it was suffocating. Clara's heart thudded wildly, each beat drumming against her chest. Alexander's voice came rough, low. "You're not like them. You don't deserve any of it." Clara lifted her eyes, lips trembling. "And you You don't deserve to be forgotten. The distance between them shrank to a single breath, their hands clasped tight, eyes locked, every fear and longing dissolving into a closeness neither could deny. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family. That morning, the sky was clear and blue, yet Clara felt a heavy gloom pressing down on her. She had slept in later than usual, her hair a little messy as she walked into the living room, planning to make coffee and fix a simple breakfast. But as she passed the porch, the crackling voice of a news anchor suddenly filled the cabin from the old radio Alexander kept on the shelf. Breaking news. Clara Bennett, heiress of the Bennett family and fiancée of Damian Whitmore, vanished during what was called the wedding of the century. Sources claim she may have fled with a mysterious man. The Whitmore group and the Bennett family have vowed to do whatever it takes to find her and bring her back. Clara froze, her whole body stiff. Her heart hammered wildly, her feet glued to the wooden floor. The announcer's tone dropped lower, as if savoring the drama. Public opinion is split. Some condemn Clara as a traitor who heartlessly abandoned her groom in front of hundreds of guests. Others suspect there is more to the story, though no one knows the truth. Online, images of her fleeing the hotel in her wedding gown have gone viral, with thousands of scathing comments attached. Her chest clenched. That image, her most terrifying moment, was now plastered across the world for everyone to mock. Clara collapsed onto a chair, burying her face in her hands. Harsh words echoed in her head. Coward, failed pawn, worthless. A tear slid down her cheek. She had thought running away meant winning back freedom, but she hadn't realized that freedom could come at the price of public humiliation. The door creaked. Alexander entered, toolbox in hand, ready to repair the fence outside. He stopped when he saw Clara's red-rimmed eyes and her frozen posture. What happened? Clara looked up, panic flooding her expression. The news, and they know everything. The whole world is pointing at me. Alexander's brow furrowed. He walked over, listened for a moment, then calmly switched off the radio. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind slipping through the cracks. I've made you a target, Clara whispered, her voice choked. If they find me here, they'll drag you into it too. They could accuse you of kidnapping or smear your name. I can't let that happen. Alexander leaned against the table, arms crossed. His face stayed composed, but Clara noticed the flicker of tension in his eyes. You've done nothing wrong, he said firmly. But the truth doesn't matter, Clara cried, her voice cracking. They only see an image, and they judge. They won't believe me, and they'll never spare you. He said nothing. He knew too well the destructive power of rumors and headlines. But this wasn't just about public opinion. This was about the fragile heart of the woman shaking before him. Clara wiped her tears, taking a shuddering breath. I have to leave. His gaze sharpened. Leave? To where? Anywhere. As long as it's far from here, so you won't be dragged down with me. She stood abruptly, her voice trembling, but resolute. You've already done too much. I can't make you the next casualty. Alexander moved swiftly, blocking her path. And you think you can face them on your own? Her fist clenched, despair flashing in her eyes. I don't know. But at least, if I'm caught, you'll be safe. I can't let your life be ruined again because of me. The words cut into him like a blade. He remembered the day the world abandoned him, when no one stood by his side. And now here she was, the so-called trouble wrapped in skin, ready to sacrifice herself to spare him. He gripped her shoulders, his voice low but unyielding. Listen to me, Clara. I don't need you to protect me by disappearing. I've lost everything once, but this time, I won't lose again. Her breath caught. In his deep, steady eyes, she saw more than coldness. She saw a promise, an unshakable resolve. Why? Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Why would you do this for me? Alexander held her gaze for a long moment, the silence thick. Then he released her, turning his back to hide what flickered across his face. Because I can't stand seeing someone cornered. Not when they deserve to be free. Clara bit her lip, her eyes stinging with tears. Her chest ached, torn between sorrow and a warmth she couldn't quite grasp. They sat down at the dining table, wordless for a long while. Outside, the wind stirred the pines, carrying that raw resin scent that reminded her the world kept turning, despite the storm in this little cabin. At last, Clara spoke softly. "I'll stay, but only for now. When I have a chance, I'll leave so you can have peace." Alexander didn't argue, didn't agree. He only nodded once, pouring himself more coffee, his mind clearly turning over some hidden plan. Clara watched him, her heart heavy, yet strangely comforted. The world outside might condemn her, but inside this cabin, at least one person hadn't turned away. That evening, rain drizzled softly against the windows, streaking the glass with blurred lines. Clara had just cleared the dinner table when she noticed Alexander standing still by the wooden desk, his eyes fixed on the old phone that rarely rang. The screen lit up, flashing with a short, chilling message. "Come out of your hole. I'll finish you off this time." The sender's name was only a string of numbers, but Alexander didn't need to guess. His hand clenched the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. "Ryan." Clara walked closer, puzzled. "Who was that?" Alexander quickly turned off the screen, shoving the phone into his pocket. "Doesn't matter." "But your face." Clara had caught the pale cast of his features, the flicker of tension in his eyes that he usually hid so well. She had never seen him like this before. When Clara stepped away to put things away, Alexander slipped out onto the porch, the phone trembling faintly in his hand. Rain tapped against the tin roof, while the motion light flickered across the empty yard. He read the message again, each word slicing deep. "Come out of your hole. I'll finish you off this time." Ryan, the man who had once been his closest friend, his partner in boardrooms and champagne toasts, who had sworn they would conquer the corporate world together, the same man who had destroyed it all, planting false evidence, colluding with rivals, and orchestrating the accident that nearly killed Alexander on the highway. Alexander had thought he'd erased Ryan from his life, but the ghost had returned, carrying threats that could no longer touch just him. If Ryan knew about Clara, she could become bait. The thought chilled him to the bone. Clara returned to the living room and found Alexander still staring into the night, his expression distant. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You're not okay. Please, tell me what's going on." He turned toward her, his eyes dark as stone. "It's none of your concern." Clara flinched. His words cut sharply, but instead of anger, she heard fear. Fear not for himself, but for her. "You're afraid I'll be in danger," she said softly, not as a question, but as a certainty. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer, but his silence was an answer enough. Clara stepped closer, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "You may not trust anyone else, but at least trust that I want to stay by your side, no matter what happens." Something flickered in his gaze, but he turned away, voice dropping into gravel. "You don't understand. That man already tried to kill me once. He won't hesitate to hurt anyone near me. Staying with me only makes you a target." Alexander sat heavily in a chair, hands clasped together, his voice rasping from deep inside. "The night of the crash, I remember everything. My car sped down the highway, brakes gone, steering locked. I gripped the wheel until my hands bled, but the car wouldn't obey. When it smashed through the guardrail, I caught a glimpse in the mirror, another car behind me and him at the wheel. His eyes cold as death." Clara's breath caught. "When I woke up in the hospital, the papers already branded me a fraud. Shareholders cut me off, colleagues vanished, and he disappeared, leaving me as the scapegoat. If not for a passing truck driver who pulled me from the wreck, I'd be dead." A bitter laugh escaped his lips, jagged with pain. "And now he writes that he'll finish me off. I believe him." Clara eased down beside him, her trembling hands covering his. "You've carried this alone for too long." His chest tightened at the warmth of her touch. He wanted to lean into it, to believe in the solace she offered, but instinct screamed that it would destroy her. "Clara, you have to leave." His voice broke, low and rough. "The sooner the better. If Ryan finds out you're with me, he won't spare you." Her eyes locked onto his, the firelight catching in their depths. "Do you really think I could walk away? You saved me when I was at my lowest. I'm not afraid." Alexander clenched his teeth, a raw ache in his chest. It was her courage and stubborn loyalty that terrified him the most, because it meant he could lose the only light left in his world. Silence thickened, broken only by the hiss of wind through the pines. He rose abruptly, pacing to the window, his eyes pinned on the shadows between the trees. He wanted to believe he could protect her, but the memory of twisted steel and failed brakes sent a tremor through his hands. Clara followed, her palm brushing his back, tender and steady. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Alexander closed his eyes, drawing a long, heavy breath. Then his voice came, a vow murmured into the storm. If he dares to touch you, I won't let him walk away. Clara shivered, yet a strange warmth surged inside her. Trust. For all his coldness, all his distance, in this moment she knew. He had placed her at the very center of his heart, and that truth was both her deepest comfort and her greatest fear. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the damp scent of earth and resin drifting through the cabin. Clara sat at the kitchen table, trying to steady her hands as she peeled apples for a pie, but the knife kept slipping in her trembling grip. Alexander entered, phone in hand. His face was stone cold, but his eyes were shadowed with unease. He set the phone on the table, its screen still lit with a message sharp enough to cut. Tonight, it's not just you. She's beautiful. Perfect bait to drag you out into the open. Clara's chest tightened as her heart lurched and then plummeted. She didn't need to ask. She was the bait. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his voice steady but merciless. You have to leave. Clara's eyes widened, disbelieving. What did you just say? You're not safe here. Ryan knows about you now. He won't stop until he uses you against me. I won't let that happen. And what about you? Clara's voice broke as she shot back. You plan to stay here alone? His hands clenched until his knuckles went white. I survived him once. I can survive him again. But you, his jaw tightened, you would be an easy target. Clara let out a bitter laugh, tears spilling. You're good at this, you know? Carrying the weight of the world alone and treating me like I'm nothing. You saved me, and then you pushed me away. Do you want me to spend my life running? Alexander didn't answer. He rose and stepped onto the porch, his gaze fixed coldly on the forest. Each of her words was a blade against his chest, but he clenched his teeth. Keeping her here meant certain danger. Sending her away, at least it gave her a chance. Clara followed, clutching the fabric of his shirt. Alexander, don't do this. I won't leave. I'd rather face him with you than abandon you. He turned, eyes dark, voice firm. You don't understand. Ryan won't stop. If he touches you, His voice cracked before he turned his face away. Her vision blurred with tears. His silence told her everything. He couldn't bear to lose again, but he didn't dare let her stay. She drew a sharp breath, lips trembling. Fine. If that's what you want, I'll go. Alexander shut his eyes. When he opened them, only frost remained. Tonight, before morning. Clara packed slowly. A simple dress, a few borrowed clothes, the small book she hadn't finished. Each item she folded into her bag cut deeper into her heart. Tears fell with every movement. On the porch, Alexander stood motionless, a cigarette between his fingers, unlit. He heard every sound from inside, the footsteps, the scrape of her suitcase on the wooden floor, each one hammering into his skull. Clara opened the door. The night wind rushed in, sharp and cold. She turned back once. I don't know where I'll go, but thank you for showing me what it feels like to be protected. He stayed rooted, his gaze torn in half, his lips pressed shut, unable to form the words clawing at his throat. Don't go. Stay with me. Clara stepped into the night, her fragile silhouette swallowed by the dark like a fading flame. Alexander's chest heaved as he watched her go. Every instinct screamed to run after her, to hold her, to beg her to stay. But his mind was merciless. Ryan would come for Clara first. Better a shattered heart than her lifeless body in the enemy's hands. The cigarette dropped from his fingers. His hand shook. In the faint glow spilling from the hearth inside, Alexander's face was carved with cracks, pain, helplessness, and a deadly fear. Somewhere in the darkness, an engine growled to life. The old car Clara had borrowed from the town grocer. Its rumble faded, farther and farther, until only the whisper of wind through the pines remained. Alexander stood there staring after her, torn between a heart that burned to follow and a head that demanded ice. For the first time in years, he felt truly alone, and this loneliness was harsher than any exile he had ever known.